Alright, back with another video. Today's video is going to be an interesting one, and it's something that I discussed with a few of my friends. As you may have guessed from the title of the video, I'm going to be ranking every Bush album from worst to best. And see, I have them all right here. No, I'm not going to be doing one of those tier list videos, because tier lists are all complete bullshit anyway. Instead, we're going to start with what I think is Bush's worst album, and work our way up to what I think is their best album. Like I said, this does not reflect anyone else's opinions regarding these albums, since everyone's list is going to be different. Anyways, let's get started with the list. First on the list is the one Bush album that isn't worth anybody's time. That's right, I'm talking about Deconstructed once again, from '97. I talked about this album's failure before, and we're gonna do it again. Although Bush is one of my all-time favorite bands, even I didn't like this album whatsoever. My mom bought this album for only $2 at Goodwill 2 years ago, because she too is a Bush fan. Of course, I had my doubts about this album, because since it's just a remix album, and I don't really care for remix albums. If you've seen the previous videos I made where I talk about this album, you'll remember that I blamed the artists who remixed the songs for the album's failure. A lot of people seem to forget that this album existed. Anyways, the worst is behind us, and we're about to get into the good stuff. Moving up, we have an album that's significantly better than Deconstructed. That's right, we're talking about Razorblade Suitcase from '96. I mentioned it before that this is my least favorite studio album from Bush, even though I can still find some enjoyment out of it, especially with the first 3 songs. I also describe this album as being more downbeat than Bush's first album, 16 Stone, but we'll get back to that later. I still enjoy this album for what it is, even though the quality isn't as good as Bush's other studio albums. It's not a bad album. Yeah, we're moving forward. Set this back here for now. Now, next up is Bush's most poppy sounding album. You may have already guessed that we're talking about Black and White Rainbows from 2017. I mentioned before that most of the songs on this album were produced by Gavin Rossdale himself, except for The Beat of Your Heart, which was produced by Bob Rock. I know the album itself isn't as good as A Sea of Memories or A Man on the Run, but I still like this album. Besides, a friend of mine told me that This Is War is tied with Bullet Holes as his favorite Bush song. I also mentioned that Foo Fighters, Weezer, and especially Linkin Park also started incorporating elements of pop into their music around this time, when this album came out. Not saying that's a problem or anything, because I let those artists do whatever they want. Anyways, I enjoy this album, and we're moving forward from here. Now, the next album we're going to talk about is The Science of Things from '99. So it's Bush's 3rd studio album, and I always consider this to be an improvement over Razorblade Suitcase. This will also be Bush's first time venturing into new wave, which I think is pretty awesome since this album is mostly in the realm of post-grunge. In many ways, this album is better than Black and White Rainbows. Anyways, moving on to the next entry. Next, we're going to talk about Golden State from 2001. This was Bush's first album that was released in the 21st century. The last album they released with the original lineup. The last album they released before splitting up in 2002. And their 4th studio album overall. This album has a slightly heavier sound than Bush's first 3 studio albums, since there are more elements of hard rock this time around, despite the fact that it's mostly centered around post-grunge. I recently made a video commemorating this album's 20th anniversary, and there's going to be a link in the description, if you haven't seen that already. I'll say that this is my second favorite album from Bush, that they made with the original lineup. in that they split up on the high note in 2002. Now, this album is certainly worth listening to, and we're moving forward. Now we're going back to where it all started. I started talking about 16 Stone from '94. This is Bush's debut album, as you may already know. And I mentioned this is my favorite of their albums that feature the original lineup. I will be considering this album for a future video on the best albums of the 90s, so look out for that. Of course, the song Machine Head was the very first Bush song I ever heard, and I was hooked the first time I listened to it. Not only that, but Bush always started their live shows with this song. I know it's because I saw Bush in concert in 2012, 2018, and 2019. Anyways, this is an amazing album, and we're moving on to the next entry. Now, the next album we'll discuss is Man on the Run from 2014. I mentioned before that most of the songs on this album were produced by Nick Reskalinix, who happens to be my favorite music producer. Some of the songs were produced by J.M. Baumgartner, while Gavin Rossdale served the role of executive producer. Until The Kingdom came out, this was Bush's heaviest album. Although this album is mainly centered around hard rock, it still retains much of Bush's signature post-grunge sound. This is definitely a great album. The next entry is rather special. You'll know why shortly. Now, this next entry is rather special because this is a live album we're going to talk about. To be specific, this is live in Tampa from 2020. No, the actual concert was from a concert that I actually attended back in August of 2019. That's why this album stands out from the other live albums that I've talked about. Since this is a live album, it stands out from the other albums on the list. I know that Deconstructed also stands out since that's a remix album, but no one really cares about Deconstructed. And this album is very special since it comes with a CD, a Blu-ray, and a DVD of the performance. It's definitely worth your time. Now we're almost at the end. And the second best Bush album to me is The Kingdom from 2020. This is Bush's first studio album with their new drummer, Nick Hughes. You know, he only plays drums on Flowers on a Grave and The Kingdom. The rest of the songs had Gil Sharon on drums. I have described this as Bush's heaviest album since it's mostly centered around hard rock. But there's still some elements of grunge and post-grunge. Well, now I would like to thank our good friend Tyler Bates for helping Gavin Rossdale to produce this album. Though Eric Rand also produced a few of the songs. You may remember that I placed this album as number 3 on my list of the top 8 best albums of 2020. This is some of Bush's best material yet, but there is one album up there that I think is even better. Now we're at the grand finale. The album that I personally think is the best Bush album is The Sea of Memories from 2011. This was Bush's comeback album. Their first albums that they made since their reunion. Their first studio album in nearly a decade. Their first album with a different lineup. And their 5th studio album overall. This album turned 10 years ago, and this album turned 10 years old not too long ago. And it's still what I personally think is the best album that Bush ever made. Besides, my favorite Bush song, The Sea of Winter, is actually the second song on this album. It's going to be hard for a Bush to top this when it comes to quality, and let's hope they can pull that off someday. And that is my ranking of every Bush album. This was a fun video to make, and I wanted to add some more variety to my channel. This every album ranked series is what I'm going to treat as a spin-off to my album review series. I'm still going to do album reviews, and you'll know what my next review will be when it goes live. When it comes to this every album ranked series, I'm also going to do episodes for the albums from Rise Against, Foo Fighters, Deftones, Disturbed, and more down the line. Now's the part where I question you. What do you think of my ranking for every Bush album? How would you rank their albums? What's your favorite Bush album? What's your least favorite of their albums? Well, let me know in the comments. Anyways, I'd like to give a shout out to the Legit Gamer 91. And there's going to be a link to his channel in the description. He's a good friend of mine. He's been very supportive of my work. I'll show him some support. Anyways, if you like the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to click the notification bell to notify of future uploads. And for watching, I'll be back soon with another video.